I've been in some meetings where I've heard people give out a little bit about the fact that because now there is a necessity for a female quota on a board in a company, that people think that women are promoted and they may not necessarily be the best ones for the job. But because you were saying like, oh, now there's a female provost, we've ticked that box, almost like a HR exercise. We'll
I
tick
think
the box.
that is absolutely rubbish. It drives me mad when
Okay,
people
because
say
that's
that.
what I wanted.
I think there are really structural things that a lot of women have to deal with. You know, when I look at Trinity, I mean, it took 429 years for there to be a woman provost. It wasn't accepted as kind of a normal thing. And actually, strangely, when I became provost, I overall felt there was huge joy and great support. But the odd few people I did meet went, gosh, I just think it's a very hard job for a woman. And you kind of blink in surprise when somebody says that, thinking, I can't believe there are people still out there like that. So without a doubt, there definitely were barriers from time to time.
Professor Linda Doyle, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Doyle Experience. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
We both arrived at the same time. I was delighted I wasn't actually late for you. I was so worried.
And likewise, I was delighted I wasn't late either. So that's a great start.
I know, it's a great start. It is. So I have you on because you are a very interesting lady. You are the Provost of Trinity and you're the first female Provost. But first of all, what does the Provost do?
So that's a good question. And actually, I think when I was an undergrad, I didn't really know myself. So the Provost is a word we use in Trinity for president. I suppose that's the first thing to say. So you're head of the university. So people who work in companies view that like the CEO, and people who come from schools view that like the principal.
Okay.
So it's the person who's in charge of the university, and basically you are involved in everything from, I suppose, driving the university forward, developing the strategically thinking about where the university wants to go. You're involved in, internal things within the university in terms of its governance and management and leadership. And you're also involved in representing the university nationally and internationally. So a huge range of things.
So you're not busy at all then with this role, are you?
No, and one of the great things actually is that every hour is really different. I mean, the fact I'm sitting here with you doing this podcast was totally different to what I was doing an hour ago and the hour before that. So,
I can imagine.
So that makes it fantastic, I have to say.
Yes, and actually what stood out to me was when you did become Provost, you took a lovely picture beside George Salmon.
That's right, yes.
Famously said he was a Provost back in 1888 to I think 1904, and he famously said, over his dead body would a woman study in Trinity, never mind become the Provost. So that was a little wink to him, wasn't it?
It was. And in fact, the story goes that, like he said, that he died on a Friday and the first woman was in the next Monday. So
they got them in.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And in fact, actually, really, really strangely, in Oxford and Cambridge, back at that time, even though women could study, they weren't allowed to graduate. So those women actually came from Oxford and Cambridge over to Trinity. They were called the steamboat ladies because they came in a steamboat to get their degrees from Trinity.
It's crazy,
around that time, yeah.
And then even up to the 1960s in Trinity, women weren't allowed room in Trinity.
That's
and
right,
they had to leave by 6 p.m. God forbid what might happen if ladies were there post 6 p.m.
Yeah, there's a famous book called A Danger to the Men. And clearly that's obviously what would have happened.
They didn't know what they'd be doing otherwise. So from the point of view of what you have studied as well, it's quite unusual because you are sciencey and also arty. So you are an advocate for women in STEM and science and engineering, but you're also very much involved in the arts. So can you explain how you do the two and how this came about? Like what was your initial involvement in education? How did you learn to love all this? So maybe a little bit about the young Linda.
So I suppose I was a bit of a nerdy young Linda. I mean, I was always really interested in education, and to be perfectly honest, my mum and dad were real, my mum had to leave school early herself, but she really saw the value of education, and we were always, I suppose, in a household where we loved that. And I remember back at a very early age, I mean, I used to be driving my brothers are younger than me and my sister, but I used to be driving them crazy trying to kind of teach them things. So I suppose I always had that in me. But when it came to going to university, I actually didn't know what engineering was. And I went to an open day in UCC, because I'm from Cork originally. And somebody started talking about engineering, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I'd like. So that's actually how I got into it, you know. And I've often said this, but one of the great things as well is I didn't actually have any preconceived notions about it. So I didn't think, you know, oh, that's a thing for men, or, you know, I didn't think anything like that, or neither did my family. So so I did engineering. And the way it works, typically when you study, I went on to do a PhD, you kind of take a deep dive into a particular topic, and I was in the area of telecommunications. But over time and over the years, after finishing my PhD, I knew that kind of engineering wasn't enough on its own. It's not that it isn't utterly amazing and fantastic, but for me it wasn't.
Okay.
So I increasingly kind of was interested in other things around the core engineering. So I'd be interested in, you know, the policies or the economic impacts. And then ultimately I started to work with artists, because working with artists is a fantastic way, I suppose, to challenge technological development. And that's kind of how that's kind of how I brought the arts and engineering together. So even though in some cases we were creating art with electronic media, ultimately I was working with artists because they're really, really good at understanding power, understanding who has it and who doesn't have it. They're really they're quite fearless about looking at new technologies. They understand things like there's no such thing as neutral design, that everything has kind of a political intent. And I think they're a great bunch of people to work with. And it's a great way to work in a group like that, to kind of question the technological development around you.
And I suppose it's a way of getting a real 360 view on things, because people that with a very sciencey brain can be very black and white.
Yeah.
So therefore, the artist, I always find, you know, I'm in awe of artists because I don't have an artistic bone in my body.
Yeah, but you've hit the nail on the head there, actually, Laura. And one of the other things I think artists are great with is dealing with ambiguity. Yes. And I think you're right, in engineering sometimes it can be a bit black and white. And I found all of those things really wonderful. And they gave you kind of, people in different disciplines use very different vocabularies. And sometimes when you hear something through different words, you began to see different kinds of solutions and think of things in different ways. Yeah. So all of that was fantastic.
Okay, absolutely, yeah. And then in terms of your advocacy for females in this space, how have you, as a woman in engineering, so you must have been one of the only ones in your class, were you? I'm assuming back then.
Actually,
or not.
Weirdly, I know, way back then. Thank you for that.
But now it's
back in the olden times.
Now it's a little bit better. Now I sound terrible. I'm going to edit that out. But now it's a little bit different. But there's not an awful lot of females in engineering, particularly.
They're not. So actually, when I did it, there was quite a big. There were 55 people in my class, and 11 of them were women.
Oh, okay.
Where at the time, actually, but it hasn't really changed that much.
Okay.
Certainly in Ireland and Europe and in other places in the world, there's way larger numbers of women doing engineering. But on a day-to-day basis, it kind of doesn't make a difference. You kind of just get on with things. And I often say, engineers are very kind of solution-focused. And to a certain extent, when you're in an environment, people are interested in kind of finding a solution, and they couldn't care less whether it's a man or a woman. But I mean, in the early stages, I do remember, this is a completely random story, but I remember I had to go to a conference somewhere and I lost my luggage. It was a conference like there was just all men. And I remember saying to some guy, oh my God, I've lost my luggage. I don't have any clothes for the next few days. And him kind of looking at me blankly thinking, why would that be an issue? And I know it seems like a completely trivial story, but sometimes it kind of, you sometimes think they're just different concerns.
Just different, I know, absolutely, yeah. And have you experienced any, I don't want to say sexism, but has it been difficult being a woman in rising up through the ranks of academia, say?
I suppose I am a kind of person who, I describe myself as the least paranoid person in the world, and I think it's a very good strength to have. So I tend not to, and sometimes you land flat in your face because you get caught out with things, but I tend not to see problems, and I tend to just go for things. But that doesn't mean, I think there are really structural things that a lot of women have to deal with. And, when I look at Trinity, it took 429 years for there to be a woman provost. And, it wasn't accepted as kind of a normal thing. And actually, strangely, when I became provost, I overall felt there was huge joy and great support. But the odd few people I did meet went, gosh, I just think it's a very hard job for a woman. And you kind of blink in surprise when somebody says that, thinking, I can't believe there are people still out there like that. So without a doubt, there definitely were barriers from time to time. And there were times when you had to really, really try and do something about it. And there were times when I suppose I just didn't think about it. And, I remember as a young academic, for example, I remember when I had my job first as a lecturer, people thinking, she's a very good teacher, isn't that lovely? And I had to go out of my way at a particular time to not talk about teaching as much and talk about research more, because I didn't want to be known as the kind of good woman teacher.
Okay.
And so there were times in my life where I had to kind of actively think, okay, I need to focus on certain things because I will get labelled and put into a box as a woman, so that I can kind of push out of that box. And then there were other times it was just more straightforward.
Okay. And the other kinds of barriers that you think that women face, what would they be?
I mean, I think there are lots of challenges in academia, especially because to a certain extent an academic life is a kind of lonely life in one way. Even though you could do fantastic collaborative projects, you're kind of evaluated on your own achievements. And if your career is interrupted in any way, for example, if you wanted to take maternity leave or you wanted to take time out for other kind of caring duties, it can be very, very difficult either to get back into things, especially if you're involved in the kind of research that moves forward very quickly, or if you're involved in research that needs funding, and if you kind of let your foot off the gas at all, that it's hard to get back on. So I think those kind of things can be, challenging for people in academia.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have kids myself, and it wasn't something I ever wanted. So it wasn't a choice I made not to have them. But I've often at times reflected that it has definitely, without a doubt, made life easier, that I didn't have to, have that trade-off.
Actually, my next comment was going to be for International Women's Day back in March, which was actually seemed to be International Women's Month, because there was so much going on, which is brilliant. But I was on a panel discussion, and it was me and 4 academics, so they all had PhDs. I was the only one there though that felt unqualified to be there. But we were all asked what was the biggest challenge in our career, and each one of them, and some of them were a lot older than me and had raised their families and everything, had said it was childcare, and it was getting their, being able to submit papers, taking the time out for their maternity leaves. One of them went back 6 weeks after having her baby, those kinds of things. And then also feeling that they couldn't say, actually I have kids at home, I have to leave. And so that is difficult, isn't it? It
is. And we saw actually during COVID, very strangely, there was a kind of a reversion to kind of typical gendered roles. So even though everyone was at home, there was that, I remember in the first year of COVID, there was a tracking of who was publishing and how many people were submitting things. And you could see there was a bigger drop off from women than men. So basically, once you were stuck in the home, people started to revert to more typical roles. And it's very interesting to see that happening. And I think it reflects the point you just made there. And it can be really, really difficult to have that interruption to your, especially if you're very research focused. And as you say, it can be difficult as well to say, I want to go home. And that's I think as an academic, I'm completely privileged, and it's a hugely privileged life where you can, follow kind of things that you're interested in and curious about. But your job has no kind of beginning, middle and end. And I can see how people, it's very hard sometimes to kind of cut at a time and say, I'm finished now, because there's always something to write or work on or think about or apply for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what they all said, which was, and the students in there, and this is a panel discussion for women in STEM, trying to encourage the female students, into STEM, or the Leaving Cert students into STEM. And then they all said, it's great. However, there's this massive big elephant in the room. And we all said if there was 5 men up here, that would be probably the last thing they would have said was the biggest challenge in their career too. That kind of way. It's just because of the roles.
I think so. I mean, I think the other side of it though is I also think there's huge opportunity for women at the moment. So I think women, for example, are really brilliant at dealing with very complex issues, dealing with big networks, and kind of joining dots. And if you look at a lot of the real challenges that face society, whether they're things to do with the planet or things to do with, geopolitics, they involve so many different moving parts. And I actually think women are very good at leading large projects that involve all of those moving parts. And really, I know it's a bit of a blanket statement and we're all individuals, but in the main, I think actually there are more opportunities to lead things than there are people who put their hands up. And I would certainly say to encourage women to do that, because I suppose there's just so many opportunities.
That's the whole multitasking female.
I think it is,
male,
yeah.
Isn't it? And women being able to kind of boil a few pots at once.
I think so. And also I think when it comes to it, ultimately, even when you're dealing with, we'll say, deep technical ideas, ultimately you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with, it's all about relationships, especially in big consortia. And it's about making those people work together and those relationships work. So I do think that a lot of women are very, very good at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with the term imposter syndrome?
I am.
Did you ever feel that you had it or experienced that feeling? Because people would say, or some would say, that if there was, two candidates for a job and the criteria for the job had to be 10, someone had to meet 10 criteria, and the woman was like, oh, I only hit 7 of them, I'm not going to go for it. Whereas the man might hit 5 and go for the same interview. Yeah. Men kind of have a little bit more, women feel they need to tick all the boxes before they'll do something, whereas men are happy to kind of, sure, listen, I'll throw my hat in the ring anyway. Do you think there's that?
I think that's absolutely true. And in fact, actually, it's really interesting that we're here with media. I remember a number of years ago, doing some training in terms of kind of being on the radio and things like that. And I think RTE were running some sessions. And it was exactly that. If they asked somebody onto a chat show, that the woman would want to know every single topic that was there. And if they felt they couldn't contribute to all the topics, they'd say no. And it was typically way easier for men to get involved. So you see that, I think you see that everywhere. And you see it playing out when people apply for jobs, just as you said. But I also think that, so I think for me, imposter syndrome has many sides. And I think there isn't a week that goes by when I don't think, oh my God, how did I get the job? Did I fool everyone into voting for me into this? I
saw your manifesto. Yeah. It was great.
Well, thank you. But and some of that is also good, I feel, because I also think it's really good when you're doing something that kind of brings you out of your comfort zone and that stretches you. So to me, there's kind of a mix of recognizing imposter syndrome for what it is and not letting it eat you away, but also checking yourself and kind of pushing yourself and, making sure you feel that little bit uncomfortable and you're stretched as well. So I like kind of a mix of two of those things.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair enough. Mm-hmm. But do you think that also the reason why women might experience that is because of the way we are raised to be good girls, maybe not ask questions, whereas boys, oh, you're big and brave. There's a little bit of a different conversation that you have with little girls and little boys. Now, I think it is changing, because I think there's lots of women out there that want to raise really strong girls, and it's not about, oh, your dress is really pretty. Whenever I always make a conscious effort if I see a little girl, because I have 3 sons. Yeah. If I see a little girl and she's really cute, and generally little girls are really cute, I don't say to her that you look lovely. I say to her, what book are you reading? Yeah. Because we do have this stereotype of little girls are really cute, but little boys are really brave. Do you think it comes from, do you think it's nature or nurture or a bit of both? Oh,
I think the answer is definitely a bit of both. And I mean, it always ceases to amaze me how young kids have already got are ingrained with particular views, like what you speak about. That is true. And I also do think, people talk about it all the time. I think people need to see people in roles so they can say, okay, I can imagine myself in that role. It's possible for me to be like that. But I think you see that. I mean, for us in Trinity, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're just men or just women who have those doubts, because when it comes to, for example, access and inclusivity, and if you want to open up education to as wide a number of people as you want, there are plenty of people out there who doubt that university is for them when it actually is, and they feel, oh gosh, that's not for me, I wouldn't be welcome there, because they haven't come from a background where they've been encouraged to look at it or had the opportunity to maybe, to meet other people who went to university or were spoken to about it in school or something like that. So you see that, I think, across, I suppose, boys and girls, depending on their backgrounds as well.
You've just naturally gone into my next topic that I wanted to talk to you about, which was what was about diversity, about education, and about the difficulties that people might have getting into third level education, depending on what socioeconomic background they come from. Can you just explain a little bit, because you did mention access? So can you explain what that is first of all, and then I'd love to kind of discuss it a little bit more.
Yeah. So in the main, when you look at who goes to university, it is easier, without a doubt, to end up in university if you come from a background of more privilege. And that is probably because a mixture of things, because you maybe go to a school that is very focused on the students and the pupils going to university. You have support at home. You're able to, if you're stuck or have difficulty in subjects, you're able to pay for extra help and all of those kinds of things. But mainly it's, I suppose, because you have been brought up with the expectation that it is your right and to be able to access third level education. So all of the students, I suppose, that we have, our big bunch of the students we have come through the normal kind of, we'll say, CAO structure and come to college that way. But there are people who are not in situations where they feel that it is their right to be able to access education. And so Trinity, we have a large access project called the Trinity Access, where we do a lot of work with, for example, deaf schools and other schools to make sure, first of all, that people are thinking about third level. And then we also have very specific programs geared towards people who come from a variety of backgrounds, so they can kind of try things out and get more familiar. We have a foundation program, get more familiar, and then kind of progress on into university.
What ages are these people?
So these would be, there's a number of things in that question. So our foundation program is for people who have left secondary school and are about to go into college. But you can never start early enough in terms of making sure people become aware. So we work with secondary schools, and then we also work with primary schools. So there's a thing called College Awareness Week that happens once a year, and Trinity and many other organisations were involved in pushing this. But this is, you go into primary schools and you make sure that people, hear about university, can talk about it, and, not to force it down their throat. I don't think anyone, I think there are brilliant other further education opportunities for people, but people shouldn't not go to university because they feel there isn't an opportunity for them or they wouldn't be welcome there. Okay.
And how many people does the Access Programme allow into university every year then?
So in Trinity as a whole, we have about a quarter, 25% of people come to Trinity through different routes. And that is either through access programmes or through, we have some mature students and people come in different ways as well. So, so 25% of our students are...
Okay. Yeah. That's a serious amount, isn't
it? It is, yeah, it is. We can do much more, but I think, it is. It's a good solid amount.
So that would kind of bring you on to funding then, and the fact that universities need funding to keep education costs down. I know myself, I went to Trinity and studied pharmacy there, and it was free to go. And I just feel so, we're using the word privilege here, but I really do, because if I'd done that degree or master's over in the States, it would have cost me hundreds of thousands. Yeah. And having that ability to have that education for everyone and open to most people if they can get it is just wonderful. So bringing that into it, how do we access funding? Because I know that government funding is down for universities, whereas the student population is up. Yeah. So how do we go about that, or how does Trinity get most of its funding? So
less than 40% of Trinity's funding comes from the state, and Trinity is a public university, and you see that pattern repeated in all the universities in Ireland. And one of the things I look at often, there's an organisation called the European Universities Association, and that does this kind of independent review of educational systems across Europe. And I always describe it as good graph, bad graph. So they produce a kind of a report every year, and on the good graph are all the countries and the systems that are thriving, and on the bad graph are the countries whose education systems are under threat. And Ireland, time and time again, lands in that.
On the bad graph?
Yeah, on the bad graph. Precisely for the reason, this is third level education, third and fourth level. Yeah. Precisely for the reason that you just said. So if you look at that graph, what you see is that we're kind of in the worst of both worlds. So we have an increasing number of people coming into education, and per student coming in year on year, less money being invested, and that is a big issue. And if you think of this country, how do we describe ourselves? We are always talking about knowledge and knowledge economy. We're always talking about the fact that, there's foreign direct investment because of the great talent here. We always talk about education being transformative, but we actually don't put enough money where our mouth is. So that trend, I think, has to be reversed. And there's good work out there that shows how much the gap that's needed to be addressed in what we call the core funding of the universities or the third level sector. And that really, really, I think there isn't a solution out of that other than the government actually putting more money in. And I think the country is, you hear about the tax returns that we're making at the moment, and every year there's kind of more of a surprise that we've even made more money. Yeah. So I think Ireland is a country that has benefited from investment in education and really, really needs to up its game, because we're falling behind year on year.
And the answer then is more government funding?
Absolutely. And that's why you were able to go to the university in the way you just spoke about, and that you're able to do all the things that you are. We ourselves raise money too, so we do that in other ways. So we have philanthropy, we have some commercial input, we compete competitively for we'll say research funding and other kind of things that you can get.
You've
work
got
with
a
industry.
Serious amount of research funding into the college, haven't you?
Yeah. So we do. It's I suppose Trinity would pride itself very much on the research that we do there, and think of our teaching kind of from the research perspective, and talk about the teaching as well being research informed. So so research is a big thing for us, I have to say.
And does that research funding help with the college? Does it just go towards funding, or does it also help with the overall working of the college?
So the reality is that you need the secure, as we call it, core funding year on year for the college to run. The research money that comes in gets spent on research. It doesn't do things like, it doesn't help maintain buildings. It doesn't. In fact, actually, in many cases, it doesn't even help maintain research equipment. So you'll see that there's a pattern in Ireland where we have decided strategically to invest in certain things, and we put a huge amount of money in, and then we never invest in it again. And I think there's a real attraction. I always talk about like a shiny new thing. So someone will want to invest in a shiny new piece of equipment, but not invest in the equipment, the kind of bog standard equipment that's used year on, year in, year out, and reinvest in it systematically. So even on the research side, there's a huge amount of challenges in terms of generating enough funding there. But it's money well spent, not just in terms of providing that education for people, which I think is just so crucial. It's also money spent in terms of, building the future of Ireland. If you look at whether you're talking about technology, whether you're talking about arts, humanities and social science, and creating a population that's able to critically think for itself and question things around, whether you're talking about people who work on translational medicine or stuff that leads to innovation. Universities are huge players in all of those spaces.
Sure, look at the mRNA vaccines.
All the
research for years that was going into them. Yeah. And then literally we were able to produce one so quickly when we needed it.
But it's not just even that, Laura. So during COVID, if you look at every single decision-making body in Ireland, the government had all of these really important committees that had to make decisions, the ones that we heard about on the TV and the ones behind the scenes. There were academics in every single one of those. The academics around Ireland brought their networks to bear, where they gathered information from across the world to help inform decisions. There were academics who went back to the front line. There were people, we hosted all sorts of, we shared equipment. So there was multiple things that happened, and that was because there was a pool of talent that actually a pool of talent that was not necessarily focused in any one direction, but could actually spring into action when the country needed it.
It was
in a kind of really flexible way.
Out, wasn't it?
Exactly.
One after the other kept coming.
Yeah.
No, you're right. So it's just so important from an entire, I suppose, like the backbone of society, really, isn't it?
And there were lots of other people who did fantastic, amazing things, not to mention the people, the frontline workers and everything. And I'm not saying that academics solved everything or did everything, but it's a real example for me, COVID was, where multiple disciplines, multiple skill sets, talent that we knew we would need and talent that we didn't know we would need, all got kind of put into action for the good of the country, in a really fast and agile way.
Yeah. We were talking about funding, but from the outside looking in, Trinity looks like it's got loads of money.
It does, because it's an absolutely gorgeous campus with beautiful old buildings, you know.
They are fab.
Yeah.
But you're in the same situation as every other university in Ireland, is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, as I was saying earlier, the university sector, needs to be better funded, and we all suffer from that in various different ways, and that's why I suppose I'm always pushing. But you are right. I often find it's really funny. You're sitting there and you might be, in recent times on a Zoom call, and there's a backdrop of this gorgeous building, and you're saying we don't have enough money.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing for us as well is that I suppose we see ourselves as, I suppose, also preserving the heritage of Ireland. So, for example, at the moment, one of our big heritage projects is the conservation of the old library. I don't know whether you've ever been into the long room where the Book of Kells is. So some of what we do as well in terms of having those old buildings, we feel a great responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to the country as a whole in preserving those.
Does the university make money out of those Book of Kells
It does,
trips?
yeah. It does. And going back to what you were asking me earlier in terms of how the university runs itself, we would not be able to cover our full costs without some of the money that we get from the Book of Kells. So it's as simple as that. That's why when for example, that building is being conserved and we will have to close it down for a number of years, we will have to put what we call an interim exhibition in place to make up for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not a lot of other universities have the Book of Kells though. So
no, but I think all the universities do different things to try and be able to deal with their costs in different ways.
And you got four busts of busts of females
that's right,
in February 2023, which was the first female sculptures in there in the long room. Yeah. Because it was all men before that.
That's right.
Was that your doing?
No, I can't take full responsibility for that. The project had started before my time, I have to say.
I was like, I wonder now, is she behind all that?
I'm glad you thought I was, so that's great. But Helen Shenton, our librarian, and my predecessor were very involved in this. And so for people who don't know, if you go into the long room, it's this absolutely beautiful library with the vaulted ceiling and really high shelves full of these most beautiful books, and people also actually recognise it by the smell. It's kind of a smell of learning in there. And down each side of it there are these rows of sculptures of various, like there's one of Shakespeare, Jonathan Swift, or Hamilton, various people, but for years and years and years they've just been men. And it is kind of strange to think it's only on the 1st of February, was St. Bridget's Day, we did it. The 1st of February 2023 was the first time there were 4 women sculptures in there. And it was really interesting. It was the most magical evening, actually, because the way sometimes you intellectually know something is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So you kind of know this is a good idea. But I didn't actually realise how emotional it was to see that happening. And the night actually was a very special night when we unveiled them. There was just a kind of charged emotion in the air that was really, really kind of special, actually.
Yeah, no, it's lovely that you say that, because even when I read that it had happened, I was like, good. Well, first of all, I was like, Christ, why hasn't there been women before now? A little bit angry. Yeah. But then, it was a lovely thing to happen. Yeah. So I suppose...
it goes back to your earlier questions, though, about, I think, challenges for women. You kind of just, you think we've made a certain amount of progress and you don't need to push anymore, the things just naturally fall into place. But that is not true. And the statues reminded me of that. The sculptures reminded me of that yet there needed a push and intervention for that to happen. It didn't just happen naturally. Yeah. And I think that's what you kind of have to remind yourself, that our institutions and systems that exist, even though a lot of good things have happened and there has been improvement, that you absolutely can't take the pressure off, because it just falls back too easily. And that I think is a big challenge.
But even look like what's happening in America and, repealing abortion rights and everything over there. So you can't rest on your laurels because there's been one female provost doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be another one. So we need to keep keeping that door open.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a phrase I would use myself, jam the door open. And the thing is that one thing you don't want to happen, if we've done the woman provost now. You probably know at the moment, of course, of the 13 universities in Ireland, 7 of the presidents are women now. But again, you just don't want to get into that mindset. We've done that now and we can revert back. And that is the key thing with all of these advances.
Yeah. I've been in some meetings where I've heard people give out a little bit about the fact that because now there is a necessity for a female quota on a board in a company, that people think that women are promoted and they may not necessarily be the best ones for the job, but because you were saying like, oh, now there's a female provost, we've ticked that box, almost like a HR exercise. We'll tick the box.
I think that is absolutely rubbish. It drives me mad when people say that.
Yes, I wanted you to say that.
Absolutely.
I want to get you going on this now.
Well, it just absolutely drives me mad because like there are people who have different views on quotas, and I think quotas work in certain places really well and would stand over them. And when you take something like that with boards, the reality is that there was a quota there for hundreds of years. It was just a male quota, 100% male quota. Yeah. And people never think of the status quo as that. The status quo of, of these boards full of men was that, it was just unimaginable that there would be women on them. So that's the first thing. So I think, that's the first thing that drives me mad, that people talk about as if there hadn't been a quota before. It was just a quota that was kind of somewhat invisible. Yeah. The second thing is, I think this notion of good or merit. I mean, good God, it's and one of the things that I say, which sometimes I think is a bit annoying for people. For me, true equality is when a stupid woman goes as far as a stupid man. So I'm not at all surprised that great women do great things, because why shouldn't there be? So that's not the issue.
I love that expression.
But that to me that's part of my reaction to this. And then the other thing is that we have a really narrow-minded view of what good looks like. So when people talk about merit and good, you can really build up that view as to be only someone who acts and looks like you, whoever you are. So this understanding of what best and important is, or not important, I should say, what best and good is, we need to just, think much more broadly. And this is going back to diversity and inclusion. So people throw around the word diversity, but it is absolutely true to say if you're making a decision and it is informed by diverse viewpoints, you will make a better decision. Yeah. So this notion, like, what does good look like? Who deserves to be here and who doesn't? For the good of the institution, they should want diverse voices around the table.
Absolutely. Speaking about diversity and inclusion, and we've spoken already about people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and how more difficult it can be for someone from a poorer family. But in terms of the student experience now and the cost of living crisis that we currently have, and the homelessness, and the fact that there's you hear about students coming up in August to try and look for accommodation, and it's impossible for them, and the stress that's involved in that. Can you discuss with me a little bit about that?
So it is without a doubt very difficult, and actually I can't leave this opportunity go without saying the fact that the Leaving Cert results are out so late is putting extra stress on students. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but the Leaving Cert results have been pushed back and back and back, and there is absolutely, from everything we're hearing, no hope that this problem will be fixed anytime soon. So you're now having anyone who's going into first year finding out at the very last minute they've got a place in college.
Why has it been pushed out so much?
So in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, they haven't given us a clear answer to that, but it definitely is a mix of not having enough people to correct papers, allowing for a second late sitting for a very small number of people, and some other things that I just don't know what they are. But to me, it's putting extra stress. So it's very, very hard to find somewhere to live. It's very stressful. And now you can imagine second, third year, fourth years, they all know they're coming back to college. They can make these plans. And then these first years at the very last minute are suddenly told they have a place. And now they're faced with having to do that even under extra stress. So sorry, I know it's a slight diversion, but I just couldn't leave that pass because I think it's very important. But you can see yourself... So I suppose you're just picking all these topics that enrage me. But
see, I knew I'd get you going on some of these things.
But the thing is, the housing crisis in Ireland, I think, is just an utter disgrace. It's not a surprise. It's not something that's just happened this year or last year. It's been building for the last decade, if not longer. And I think it's infinitely solvable. And we so the students in university, very like many other people in Ireland, really struggle to find places to live. And it is absolutely ruining as well, I think, our competitiveness as an island. So we're finding it, we have anecdotal evidence of people who were going to come here turning down jobs. It's hard to get a full measure of that, but we know people who have chosen not to come to Ireland because they can't find places to live. We have challenges with staff, and of course the students have a really, really difficult time. And it's really important that Ireland is outward looking. It's really important that people from right across Ireland can come to Trinity, not just Dublin people. It's important that people from other countries can come to Trinity. And I think the housing situation is just making it harder and harder. And I think it will really, really cause problems for the country going forward.
I absolutely agree with you, because when I was back in college, you were surrounded by people. I actually think there was only 2 of us from Dublin in my class. So you were surrounded with people from the country or the country. God, I sound such a dub, don't I? Like, literally, apologies.
I'm from another city down the country, by the way.
I apologise to anyone who's living outside Dublin for that comment. It just sounds ridiculous. And then also other countries. And that's the wonderful thing about going to university, because you spend 6 years in school with the same people from the same area, and then you can go to college and you can be a totally different person. Yeah. So. And I have read before that you'd said it would be awful if people from Galway only went to the Galway University, if people from Dublin only went to Dublin University, because you're not getting that mix of people. But that's actually what's going to happen, and what probably is happening. And we probably don't even track it or know it yet.
Absolutely. And, I think we have students who have to commute longer distances, and you know how hard it is to concentrate in your work. We have students, without having to add hours and hours to your day. We have students who live in very poor accommodation. We have students who have to do a lot more extra work now to make ends meet.
Paid work.
Yeah, paid work, in the evenings or at the weekends. So all of this kind of eats into the kind of student experience as a whole. So the cost of living is affecting, the cost of living crisis is without a doubt affecting everyone. And obviously I look at things through, I suppose, the lens of the university, and it is, there's loads of families in this country that are really challenged by it. But it is materially affecting a lot of people's experience of university, and I think that's just not good.
I even joined the societies that you can go to at the end of the day, and all of those kinds. If you have to travel home and it's a long commute, you're not going to be having those late night parties. Yeah,
that's true, but it's not even... But when I look at the university, when you look at our students, you can see, of course, we love to think that all of their knowledge has gotten through their lectures and their wonderful professors. But the reality is that they build a huge amount of skills through all the other things they do, whether it's sport or whether it's the clubs and societies, or the societies that they're belonging to. It's through building their networks, building friends, building their social skills. All of that really matters, just as much in terms of them developing in every which way they can and developing as a full person. So, anything that erodes that is just not good.
And when you said that the housing crisis is a solvable issue, how would you solve it?
I would
discuss.
Discuss. Yeah. So first of all, I would stop doing all of the same things I've done for year in, year out, and expecting a different outcome. That definition of madness.
Good way to start.
I would take a bit of an approach like we did to COVID, where COVID was a genuine crisis. We utterly focused the mind on it, and we did that from kind of multiple angles. We realised that COVID, was about vaccines. It was about behavioural change. We realised it was about provision of services. We realised it was about distributed services. It was about change behaviours. It was about all of those things. We didn't think it was about any one thing. So I'm not saying that everything about how we did COVID was perfect, but we came together from multiple disciplines and perspectives and tackle that problem seriously. So I don't see why we can't take that kind of an approach to housing. And I also think we can afford to take that kind of approach to housing, given the way the country is situated financially at the moment. So there isn't any, I suppose, I don't think there's one kind of absolute silver bullet, because it's a complex problem. But I think we're well capable of dealing with complex problems with multiple moving parts if we focused on it fully and completely in a sustained way and in an urgent way.
Yeah. And what do you think about the eviction ban then that's recently happened, where they've lifted this and people might be put out of their homes?
I was really sad to see that lifted, because I think I I think there's so little alternatives for people. And I mean, in terms of our focus, I suppose, is very much on student accommodation, and we're doing what we can. So we opened this year another block of student accommodation, but it's still not enough in the greater scheme of what's needed. And certainly, when I think about the housing crisis, while we will focus on what we can do for students, it won't be solved unless it's solved completely as a housing, it won't be solved by just looking at students. It's the housing crisis as a whole that needs to be solved.
Of course. We talked a little bit about on COVID just there. How did COVID, in your opinion, or it probably isn't even an opinion, it's probably fact, affect students and student life, and those students that were, I suppose, they did their third and fourth year behind, closed doors?
I think it's been really, really hard. I mean, there are a lot of students, like so typically in Trinity, so the undergraduate degree is 4 years and you take 4 years to do your PhD. But we also have students who do master's courses who might be 1 and 2 years. So we have a chunk of people whose entire experience of their education in Trinity was based from doing it from their bedroom. And then we have a chunk of people who their degrees were hugely disrupted. And then we have a chunk of people who spent the few years before they came to college in their bedroom. And there is a really long tail of COVID, I have to say. And you can see yourself, like it manifested for us in many ways. So we had way, way more people looking for counselling and mental health and facing mental health issues than we had in previous years. So when you looked at your typical average year and how many people wanted to use our counselling services, way, way more in the last number of years, and that continues. So you could see that heightened anxiety, you could see the challenges with social skills. And now that the university's opened, obviously huge improvements, and you can see that across all of the campuses in Ireland. But I still think things aren't as vibrant as they were before COVID, and people are still finding their way back. So you go to fantastic student things and they're brilliant and there's amazing things happening. But I think the scale of things has another way to go yet for it to be fully back. And the good thing for me, I don't know whether you read any of these things, but at the start of COVID, there was all these kind of dire predictions that we don't need physical universities anymore. Everything can be online. To me, it put pay to that, because the actual need to be physically present in a room with other people, to have those social experiences, to have the kind of, it's very different talking to you here sitting next to you than it would be actually if I was at the end of a phone line or on Zoom or something. So all of that, you could see how absolutely important was that is, and how much they need it and how much that's part of your development.
So true, because even I'm a tutor for pharmacy students, and some of them had come through me during COVID and they had no access to the pharmacy school apart from online training, and their experience was just so different. But it's almost like, as well, you're saying about the vibrancy is a little bit is missing somewhat, and I think that goes for all walks of life.
It does.
We're so used to, I suppose, jumping on a Zoom now, and even if someone wants to meet me and I'm like, oh, could I be bothered going to do that? Will I ask them for a Zoom instead? Yeah. But there's nothing that beats that one-to-one. And I suppose that the lecturer in the room is so different from the lecturer online, and you can have your camera off and be half listening or not ask the question because... Yeah. So there is that too, isn't there? There
is. I mean, I heard this fantastic phrase that you can't digitize serendipity. And I think that's actually a really, really good phrase, because a lot of what you do, both in terms of fun and experience and your socialize, are the random things that happen, and also when you're learning. Now, I do also think that there was an awful lot of, there's kind of positive things about that kind of remote engagement. So one of the things that was really clear to me, if you had any issue around mobility or access, through disability, actually being on Zoom, not just was it much easier, it was also, everyone was kind of more equal, if you know what I mean, because you don't know what circumstances people are. So there were some good things. And I also think there's things as well that make you really think and push as a teacher, as a lecturer. Because I think pushes you to think about how the physical presence of being there needs to be more, and what more you can do as somebody who's in education when people are there. Because, one of the other things that happens like students now are well used to looking at recordings of lectures rather than being there. So I think it puts the pressure on you in a good way to say, okay, what is special and different about people physically being here, rather than me just standing at the top of the class and just kind of reeling off a whole load of stuff. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're talking about the future of education, and I know you have done. One of your speeches was about imagine Trinity in the future, and I want to talk a little bit about that too. But in the future, and with artificial intelligence and Chat GPT and all of that, how do you see that fitting in to university life? Apart from us being able to tell that something was a thesis was AI generated or not, I'm hearing lots of people say, well, look, I'm actually using it for my work to start off a research project, give me all the ideas for it, and then I can hone in on something really good. So it saves me a week of work, but then I get a better outcome in the long run. So what are your thoughts on it? And will it take the place of critical thinking?
So I think ChatGPT and all of those things are just really, like, I mean, it's incredibly impressive if you ever play around with them and use them as to what they can do, you know. So I think the whole idea that you're going to outrun the technology, it's not possible. So, for example, if students, use these products or tools or apps to plagiarize or to do their homework for them, whatever way when you put, we have to just be cognizant of that and push ourselves to assess people in different ways. And maybe the only way you can really assess someone, is by talking to them and asking them questions. Who knows? But we need to keep asking ourselves questions like that. That's on one side. On the other side, I agree with you. There's really powerful traits that these have. So I was talking to a friend of mine who's a brilliant programmer anyway, but he was using ChatGPT to actually, he wanted to advance his skills in a particular direction, and he found it really good. And like what you said, he was able to do it faster by using it. Now, he came to it from a point of view of extreme skill in the first place. He used it skillfully and he advanced his own skills. Yeah. So to me, I think there's a place for these tools. There's a place for you being honest and open as to what you're using them for and when you're using them. And it's up to us to ensure we instill values in our students so that they are honest, so that they do say what they're using and when they're using it and for what. And also that we instill the critical skills in them so that they can actually engage with these tools in useful ways, in ways that will progress things.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to encourage its use as well.
Yeah.
So there's no shame about using them, but they need to be used in a particular way.
A transparent way, yeah. I mean, I randomly one day checked out, I said, I got it to write a press release on a very technical topic to see would it do it, the way I'm sure loads of people, and it did it really, really easily. And you just thought, so there's a whole load of things where you'd say to yourself, okay, why shouldn't it just start off in something and then I'll fix it and, add to it and things like that. So to me, it's about the transparency, it's about the honesty, and it's about the skillful use of it. Now, the important other side of things, though, are even though these tools are really, really powerful and strong, going back to our previous conversation, there's also bias in these. And one of the things that I suppose, and I know it sounds very grandiose, but I don't want the patriarchy kind of embedded in the AI world and kind of playing itself out in terms of, I suppose, the feedback it gives us. Yeah. And I think that's a big question for us as well. How are you skilled enough to be able to understand the biases? Because if you can, where are these algorithms? They're feeding on the information that's in the world around them in order to train themselves and to be able to respond. And if the world around them is a biased world, or if the information they have access to is like that, then why won't they just recreate some of the really negative things about society already? And that to me is the really important thing.
Well, what I read recently was that AI could infiltrate, say, Facebook, Instagram, all of these social media, and put out loads of opinions that someone wants them to say, or, whatever.
Yeah. So that happens anyway. And that is, you had human beings and bots doing that, in truckloads to make money in various different formats during various elections in the US and other places. But the thing about doing anything through, I suppose, a computer program is it can do it more effectively and more widespread. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I just think I just don't know enough about it, and it was one of my sons that showed. Oh, Mom, look! You can write an essay on whatever.
And how old is your son? Who did
14?
Yeah,
so mad into it. Yeah. And then he got. We were out for my mum's birthday there last weekend, and he got ChatGPT to write a poem about her, and then. So we wrote a poem about her, and then then he said, okay, so write a poem about her, write that same poem in the voice of Tiger Woods. And like, it was a funny poem, but it was kind of like as if he had written it. So it's amazing what it can do. But then obviously there is,
But that is the challenge for us. So the challenge for us in the educational world is, how do you, educate people in a world that those kind of tools will increasingly be part of our lives, and to use those in ways that I suppose make sense, and kind of add rather than take away. And I think that's the key thing. And it is difficult. You will see. You might have seen the meme or the image of the Pope in the puffer jacket going around the place. So I mean, it is really, really easy to create fake images, to create deep fake videos. You could do a video of me now getting me to say, in my own voice with my mouth moving the exact right way, putting any words you want into my mouth. And the thing is, there is a tendency in the population in general to believe any of those things they see.
Believe the worst.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, that's why, I mean, we talk about this in kind of strange ways sometimes. I mean, people believe all the rubbish that's in tabloid newspapers all the time, and there's no ChatGPT there at all. But so in one sense, I think, I think it's the same problem that's all around us, potentially more effectively produced in some cases than maybe on the front of a newspaper. But nonetheless, it's the problem where we need more people to stand back and say, actually, no, I don't believe that. That doesn't make any sense. What's the evidence for that? What other information is there? Is that evidence just based on one data point? And unfortunately, that's the way I think we all have to be about all of these things we see and read.
Yeah, no, I agree. Does the world of academia worry that they may not be able to pick up the AI bots or these ChatGPTs or whatever might get so sophisticated that it'd be difficult to pick up if a student has used it or not? Or
I think there is genuinely a worry. I mean, there are lots of, before, I suppose ChatGPT has highlighted that a bit, but before it even existed, there were lots of, there's like essay mules and all sorts of things students can avail of. And so if you really want to cheat, you can, and I think, yes, it is true to say that somebody will get away with it if they come up with use the latest technology. But again, I'll go back to what I said. We can't design a world on the basis of the small number of people who cheat. We need to design the world for the vast majority of people who don't. And we need to instill values in people where they question that. And then at the same time, be wise to maybe doing things in new and different ways.
Yeah, agree. You... When you were speaking, when you first became provost, you were talking about Imagine Trinity. It was part of your manifesto as well. So where do you see Trinity, or how do you see Trinity changing, or what do you want to do for Trinity in the next 10 years?
Yeah, so that's a big question, but maybe I would answer it in this way. So I very much often talk about, and I say I want Trinity to be a good university. And some people kind of balk when I say that, because when you're in a space of academia, people always talk about excellence and kind of world-class work. So for me, so they're surprised when you use the word good, and for me,
mediocre.
Yeah, it's exactly, and that's not what I mean at all. So when I look at Trinity, I think there is a load of things I'm really, really proud of and love, but there is much more we can do in two very specific ways. So for me, it's about building what I call a stronger social foundation in the university, and living within our ecological ceiling. So we don't live within our ecological ceiling at the moment. The country doesn't, the world doesn't. I think there's huge onus on us to really, really be much more radical and take stronger steps in doing that. So that ecological ceiling, to just live within it, and then that social foundation, that's very much about doing everything we can within the university to make sure that people's voices are heard, people are included, people have the resources they need to get on with what they want to do. Some of the things that we were talking about earlier in the funding, the space and the time to get on what they need to do. And I think if you have those things, if you don't have those barriers, people just do brilliant things.
So how are you going to do all that?
So it's... I'm
not going to let you off. We're just saying that.
No, good point. So when it comes to kind of looking at this in the round, first of all, there's a ton of things you have to tackle. But maybe starting with the ecological ceiling, we have our first ever Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action. She's in the role less than a year. And that to me is both symbolic and practical thing to do. So it's a symbolic in saying, okay, we're taking this much more seriously, and it's practical in the sense that she is working with us as a whole in the university to look at everything we do, whether it's education, whether it's research, whether it's our day-to-day operations and our behaviours, and how we kind of significantly can collectively change those and shift those to make that change and to try live within that ecological ceiling. So that's the kind of thing we can do, and that's one strong example. On that social foundation, there is a lot of stuff we can do, but let me give you an example. So for example, we've developed quite a sophisticated approach. For example, when the Ukraine war happened, we have a very strong what we call sanctuary fund. We're doing a lot more work in terms of us being a university of sanctuary, and this kind of working with what we call scholars at risk, so that people can come to Trinity and there's some supports for them to be able to, if they fall through the net somewhere else. So there's things like that in the social foundation, but there's also things in that kind of strong social foundation about ensuring, and there's a lot of work to do in this. I mean, Trinity is at ensuring that all academics from different disciplines have their say. Trinity is a comprehensive university, and in the world we live in, and even in the questions you've been asking me, a lot of them are about STEM. Mm-hmm. It's really important to me that the other disciplines are preserved, that we have that kind of wide, comprehensive view, because going back to the planet, going back to other things, all of these problems are problems that are not solved through one discipline alone, and need that kind of multiple perspectives, and need those different disciplines to all be at play. So part of that social foundation is not just doing things for inclusivity in terms of disadvantage, but also building all of the strengths of all of the disciplines, ensuring that the voices across those are heard and come into play. And then there's very practical things like we were speaking about earlier. A lot of my work is about the fight for more funding, either doing that, trying to encourage politicians to understand why we're asking for that, and to support the sector more. And also, I suppose, in raising philanthropy for key projects that we want to do and things like that as well.
And when you said a lot of it was focused on STEM, I suppose it's easy for, maybe it's someone like me, because I was STEM, to think that it's only people in STEM that can help with the biodiversity or help with the ecological ceiling, but it isn't. It's absolutely all the disciplines, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's to me, like so one of the developments we're working on at the moment is we refer to it in Trinity as Trinity East, and it's an area down in the Docklands, which is which we've decided to take a totally different approach to, where we're not going to knock and build. We're going to completely do refurbish and retrofit. We're going to look at the biodiversity of the space.
Is that more expensive?
It is at times, yeah, it is. In some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't. We're kind of taking a real circular economy approach. But for me, it's going to be a place of real intense research and innovation. And one of the key things there is that there be no boundaries between discipline, and that, there's, when you think about sustainability broadly, there you need people who are working on next generation technologies. For carbon capture, you need people who understand botany and biodiversity. You need people behavioral scientists who know how to change people's behaviours and encourage people to think in different ways. You need people who are interested in health, because, a healthy planet, a healthy body, all of that is interconnected. You need people who are interested in culture, because, we learn and understand a lot of the time and are moved through culture. You need all of these. You need people who bring that critical thinking from whatever other discipline they have, who bring new forms of vocabulary, new ways of thinking that kind of pick problems apart. You need all of those to come together, and many, many more, to really push things forward. So that's why I think the multiple disciplines are so important, and why it's fantastic to be a university that has that, to be, as we call it, a comprehensive university that has, that range. We have 3 faculties and 24 schools, and many more disciplines when you break that down, and they all have something to contribute to make the world a better place.
Goodness, yeah, the Cork accent really comes out when you get passionate.
I wasn't trying to hide my Cork accent.
No, but it's
You're
really,
right.
it's really strong. When you get passionate about something,
yeah.
it's really strong. And is all that biodiversity and not reaching just staying within your ecological ceiling, is that all to do with research then into this, or is there projects going on at the minute that are working?
Yeah, so we have, at the moment, we have about 160 research projects that are connected with across the university, from the individual to huge, big, large scale groups of people coming together. But no, it's not just research. So, I mean, if you want to, like, it's multiple things. So it's about it. I suppose we have a belief now, even though we haven't cracked how we are exactly going to do this, every student needs to know something about sustainability, and, you need to be able to understand, you need to be an expert in whatever it is you're studying, but you need to be able to bring that sustainability perspective to bear, through your own area. So it's about what we teach and what people learn. It is also about the research we do. But it's also about how we run our research. So you've probably heard of things like green labs. And that's all about like how you actually operate a lab in a sustainable and green way. And then it's also about our operations. It's about how the university is run. It's about what fuel we use. It's about, our own carbon footprint. It's about our travel behaviours. It's about all of that. So it's about absolutely everything, and I suppose in one sense that's what's scary for people, that, when you're serious about trying to do this, it touches on every single thing you do. Because it really does require systematic change.
Yeah. And I think actually, because one of the questions that I was thinking of asking you was, but we've already answered it in this entire talk, was Elon Musk has said that he doesn't see that universities will be important anymore because everyone can just get all the information they need off the internet.
Yeah.
But I think that we've just demonstrated how that's absolutely not the case. And if we want to progress as societies and as individuals, it's so very important.
But I mean, if you look at Elon Musk is like exceptionally and phenomenally wealthy because of the way the world is set up at the moment, that a small number of people in the world have an obscene amount of wealth, and if you want the world to continue like that, they can just read all the stuff from the internet. But one of the things I think university is there for is to say, okay, the world is broken, it isn't working like this. We need different models, we need different ways of being, we need different ways of the economy running, we need different ways of thinking. And of course you can in your room on your own have those thoughts, but you can only really, I think, affect change if you actually have multiple people working on things in the first place, and you have that multiple perspectives that we spoke about. But, to kind of get things moving and to get that systematic change, I think, and I'm not saying universities are the only places, many, many places this can happen, but I think for me, a university needs to be there to drive change.
Yeah.
And we need to do that better and better.
Yeah, we need to just keep an eye on ourselves and each other. And that's what university allows for too. But as you say, people can educate themselves in so many other ways, but it's the driving force behind all this research and development that wouldn't happen otherwise, really.
But it's also, it's when I hear Elon Musk, making the world a better place is about respect, it's about kindness, it's about fun, it's about all of these things that are to do with social interactions, and you're certainly not going to do that by reading the internet on your own.
Absolutely not. And that's why I worry a little bit about children nowadays growing up. And I hear it from other parents that our children don't go out with each other as much anymore. Yeah. So they're not, whereas I know I was like, I'd be calling up and you'd be standing at the door waiting for your friend to come. And, you may or may not be invited into the house, but you'd be outside a lot. Whereas kids now, it's a lot of conversing on their phone. And even to the point that you think they can't really tell stories anymore because it's all pictures. It's like, look at this, look at that. Yeah. So I worry from that sense about social interaction, even just on a very small scale, never mind as they get older.
I suppose I try to kind of balance that. I think, first of all, I do think people still can tell stories. They just do it in a different way. So some of the stories, when you look at something like Instagram and you see the kind of little reels and everything that people are producing every day, and some of them are so creative and so fun and so amazing. So I think you can tell story in different way and through different media, I suppose. But I probably would be aligned with your way of thinking that, you know, there is something very special about that kind of human interaction that isn't mediated or isn't through some other
through some other form of media. It's just like the one-to-one. So in one of the interviews that I listened to, you said leadership is about service and not power. So can you just explain what you mean by that?
I suppose to me, it was the best way of summarising what I feel my understanding of leadership is and the kind of leader I want to be. And, you know, when you're in a head of a university, in one sense, it can be a very powerful role and you can have a say in a lot of things. But I don't think of it, or you can tell people what to do. So I don't think of it as kind of, you know, being there to tell people what to do. I think of it as, and I know it can sound corny, being there to serve the people in the university, our students and our staff, and what can I do to make this a better place for them all. So I think of it that way around, I suppose. And where it also comes from is, and it goes back to some of your previous questions. So people often have a very narrow view of what good and strong leadership looks like. And I found, for example, so my role is an elected role and you have to run for election. And, you know, some people would say, oh, are you strong enough to take hard decisions? And I think sometimes people ask you that because they expect, if you're taking a hard decision, that you're shouting, that you're not listening to other people, that you're the person who's kind of banging the table or something like that, that it looks a certain way. And I would have a very, very collaborative style of leadership, and I would have a style where I want to bring people along with me. And that is not incompatible with taking really hard decisions. And sometimes you've taken that hard decision without people even realising it. So for me, it goes back to, I think fundamentally sometimes people understanding leadership from a very male perspective. So I suppose,
I think you're right.
Yeah. So it was a way of saying what leadership meant to me and the way I think leadership should be. So that's where that phrase came from.
But that's something that stood out to me because I would have always been a bit like that when I was running the pharmacy. It was always a collaborative thing. It was never you're going around, you know, wagging your finger at people. It's, if everyone has a part in the decision making, I think everyone is happier overall, and we can all work well together then.
And that doesn't mean you don't have to. I mean, there's lots of times when there isn't consensus and there isn't enough. And actually, you see, this is the thing. Most decisions, if decisions are black and white, they're actually easy to take. But most of the stuff I'm dealing with, there isn't a right answer. Anything you do, half the people are going to think it's a good idea and the other half are not, if you're lucky. So, you know, it rarely boils down to, and maybe that is the area I'm in, the academic, university situation. It rarely boils down to, so it's not like I'm in a production line and, you know, there's an absolute right or wrong decision about this product that you're making. So it rarely boils down to something very black and white. You know, it's usually you're dealing with grey, you're dealing with trade-offs, you're dealing with complexity. And that to me is just so much better worked through in that collaborative way.
So do you have to be very persuasive then sometimes?
I think, I absolutely. I think, and I'm not necessarily sure I always am, but I do think a lot of leadership it does have that bit about persuading people to come on that journey with you, whatever that journey would be or whatever that would look like, and, you know, big or small.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I don't think I have any other burning questions other than my two that I ask every podcast guest. I hope you were tipped off. So what advice would you have for young people today? So I was thinking about that, and what I normally say to that is that any advice anyone would give me when I was young, any advice I'd get from someone my age when I was young, I'd have ignored it, disregarded it. So I say it in the full knowledge that I don't think anyone would take advice. But I thought about it again, and actually the advice I would give at the moment is do not be afraid of people who have different opinions to you. And that to me is a really key thing that's emerging at the moment, where we don't listen. The world is just becoming so much more polarized, and I can see it among young students as well. About there's a notion of what's the right opinion to have and what's the wrong opinion to have, and I think that's not really a good way to head. And I know being young is about being ideal and really believing in something, but don't be afraid of people with other opinions and other viewpoints, and listen to them and engage with them. And Professor Linda Doyle, What is the meaning of life?
I think it's a very hard question. And I've been thinking, how could I answer that? And, I suppose sometimes when you ask questions like that, you feel obliged to give a deep and meaningful answer. But I was thinking about it in the context of a poem that I really like. And the poem I really like is about death, actually, when death comes. And there's a last line in it that says, I don't want to end up simply having visited the world. And that says it for me.
That's lovely. So, Professor Linda Doyle.
I've been meaning to say to you every single time you've said Professor Linda Doyle that I'm actually now Dr. Linda Doyle. And
you've been relegated.
I've been demoted. So they have this little strange thing in Trinity where when you become provost, out of deference for all the other professors in the university, you become a doctor again.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of out of respect for all of the people. You're not higher than any of the people around you. So I'm actually Dr. Linda Doyle now.
There you go now. You learn a new thing every day.
Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt you when you started the podcast so nicely and say it.
Oh, you're lovely. Okay, well, listen, thanks very much, Dr. Linda Doyle.
And thank you very much.